Telling a story is hard these days in a world transfixed upon limitless data and boundless detail. Now, when we take note of the innumerable database of the past, we call this process history. History is concerned with facts and events, be it social, political, economic, or personal facts, of which there is endless aspects to include. Yet how can we come to choose something like a man of the century, or a song of the year, or the movie of an era, or an obituary? How could you record all of the facts of one person's history in a measly 2 paragraphs? Could we pull random data to fill the given space, perhaps? Well, we'd end up with something like Bob gently wiped his nose with a right thumb. That's not exactly moving, and one might object, but Bob was more than his outward historical facts. Bob was a spiritual being, a kind soul with inward qualities like virtue and compassion. So on one hand, you have to leave out an exponential amount of Bob's historical data. And on the other, you have to cut short the endless descriptions of the inward well of Bob's essence. Inevitably, exponential detail will be excluded in Bob's obituary due to limited attention. Remember, 2 paragraphs. With a fiercely limiting attention, how do we choose the 0.001% of content to include in this obituary? Selection. Selection requires an a priori standard of meaning. It's the ideal we have in our heads that we base our measurements of the data. It's the standard in the pinnacle of the meaning hierarchy. So we have A and we have B, and we know that B is better than A because there is something that transcends it that we're measuring the two. So which do we refer in writing Bob's obituary? What would we refer in writing your obituary? Historical facts or qualitative descriptions of the essence of who you are? Likewise, do we focus on the familiar, beloved features of his life or the mysterious oddities that often perplexed us? It seems that we have arrived at a juxtaposition. We have the measurable versus the immeasurable, the quantitative versus the qualitative. So how do we numerically measure something like an out-of-body experience? Do you state it as fact? Bob had an out-of-body experience on July 1st, 2019. No, this falls short. And in this tension, we have both events and essence, and they're both important, but how to tell one without diminishing the other? Bob's obituary is an arbitrary example at the individual level, but what about at the community level? How do we fitfully articulate the expanded database of many people ascribed to one group? Let's look at an example. Theologian and philosopher David Bentley Hart came to this crossroads in tackling the arduous task of conveying the entirety of Christendom in his 343-page book, The Story of Christianity, a history of 2,000 years of the Christian faith. One would perhaps concede that Hart could successfully cover the 2,000 years of the world's most practiced, most widespread, and most diverse religion if he stuck to the main high points, like the first church, the legalization or conversion of the Roman Empire, and the Reformation, let's say. And he does. But then he ups the ante. He sets out to include the minor movements as well. And right when you thought he's done himself in, he also commits to bringing to light the often overlooked mysteries on the margins of the Christian world, and all in 343 pages. So if you calculate it, each century gets approximately 6 pages each. Can you imagine describing the 21st century in 6 pages? Think of Bob's obituary, times 10 million or more, and he's going to fit it into these 6 pages. Is it an impossible undertaking? Yeah, perhaps. But how does Hart pull it off? Let's take a look at the introduction to his book to see how he uses the symbolism of story to accomplish this daunting task. A written history of Christianity is concerned, of necessity, with history, which is to say with social and political matters, nations and rulers, states and institutions, compromises and wars. Okay, so he's laying out the historical telling that's concerned with facts, of which there's seemingly limitless details and events to pull from. Now, if you notice, it seems as though he swings the pendulum as I keep reading. This being so, one might object that a book of this sort cannot really record the story of Christianity as such, or as people experience it, of the beliefs, ideas, and values that Christian faith instills in the individual men and women, but can at most relate a series of episodes in the evolution of cultures and institutions that happen to have been populated by persons who happen to be baptized. This is a perfectly fair objection. Perhaps the only true story of Christianity is that which unfolds in the hearts and minds of believers. Even so, these hidden movements of the Spirit have made themselves manifest, even if only fitfully, in the outward events of Christian history. Thus, a book like this perhaps still has the power to illuminate that other more secret and mysterious story, whose discrete moments occur everywhere and nowhere, and which cannot otherwise be told. Okay, so in this pendulum swing, he then addresses the invisible attributes. He listed off like beliefs and ideas and values, also principles or philosophies, the essence of the experience of Christianity. These qualities by themselves are formless, but irrevocable from the Christian practitioner. Again, we arrive at this juxtaposition. So history describes these outward events and facts, but this telling falls short of what unfolds in the hearts and minds of believers. We have this outward description versus the inward revealing. So how does he reconcile the two? So I'm going to be pulling from Matthew Peugeot's work, The Language of Creation, to help explain through what he calls the ancient cosmology. And in this cosmology, we have one part that's heaven and earth, and the other part which is a pairing of time and space. Now, if any of this is a little bit confusing, I did a review in 3 parts of Matthew Peugeot's book. You can check it out. I'll put a banner in the area above, but also a link in the description below. And please refer to these because they can help create an overview of what I'm about to describe. So firstly, heaven and earth, these invisible attributes of heaven, which are belief, ideas, values, meaning, are materialized by elements of earth. So the raw materials of fact and dates and events, locations. Earth is a random set of limitless data, and it is raised by heaven to produce meaning, correlation, and patterns. So in this, a symbol is the physical embodiment of spiritual meaning, or when heaven and earth come together, they make symbol. Or in this case, when the essence and the events come together, they make a story. And he also says these hidden movements of the Spirit, Hart writes, have made themselves manifest. So what he's saying is the essence or the Spirit is being manifested by the material or the body, the people. And these people, they do things in the world, and they turn out to be events, and they act in history. So the Spirit is bringing down meaning to matter and body. And in like manner, matter is offering up material to host this Spirit. So meaning synthesizes seemingly random data. And as this is happening, it's creating the symbolism of story, that these inner happenings within individuals and in individual hearts come together with outward events that unfold into the Christian history. So we have the essence and the events. The second part of this cosmology to help describe the symbolism of story, time and space. So with time, we have the cyclical aspect, the transformative aspect, as well as it being the opposite of space. And space is think of it as the familiar, the built environment, that which multiplies the principles. Okay, so I want to read one more section in the introduction of Hart's book, and hopefully this will bring it home. He goes on, to tell this story in a way that does proper justice to its improbability and variety, one must consider not only its larger features, that is, Christianity's larger features, But Christianity is more minute as well. Not only its most resplendent and historically successful expressions, but its most obscure and frequently forgotten. Not only its most familiar forms, but its strangest. Okay, so on one hand, he says that he needs to focus on these larger features, the resplendent and historically successful expressions, and the familiar forms. What these are creating is the central part of the garment, let's say, representing the domain of space. And we can see the recognizable patterns that are familiar, and they multiply and they build space. Think of it as also the core tenets of the faith and the familiar landmark events in the timeline of Christianity, like the Council of Nicaea or the Reformation. But then he also talks about the minute features, the obscure expressions, the strangest forms. And think of these as like the fringes around the tapestry or the loose threads at the end of the garment. And these are very important as well to the telling of the Christian story. And he doesn't want to leave these out. So one of these mysterious elements that Hart tells in his book is about Saint Seraphim of Seraph. Now it is said that he was so one with God's creation, with ecology, with the creatures in the woods, that a person viewed him feeding a bear from his bare hand. And as Peugeot writes, we need both. We need the mystical and the practical. On page 193, he writes, this covenant that is between time and space guards against the extreme powers of absurdity and confusion and pointless change, and the extreme powers of reason, purity, and productive stability. So the familiar primary features of Christianity act like a seal, keeping the floodwaters of mystical radicals from washing away the foundational principles and events of the faith, while the mysterious elements on the fringe of Christianity prevents reason from forcefully integrating all that is strange. We need the principle and we need the mystical. It prevents us from saying, yeah, we've got it all figured out on one hand, and it's all mysterious and esoteric on the other. Often God chooses the simple things of this world to confound the wise, and we need both. Now, to illuminate this point, where we need these elements of time and space, or we need the tapestry, we need the fringes, we need the practical and familiar and fortifying, and we need the mysterious. I want to tell you a story about the teachers of old that decided to go off and check and see how their jurisdiction and all of the different establishments and churches and monasteries were doing. And so these theologians and priests and teachers set sail, and they reached an island on the farmost parts of the region. And on it was a handful of simple, illiterate monks who just dedicated their lives to prayer. And once they arrived, the teachers showed them the Lord's Prayer and walked them through the parables and the Gospels and the other core tenets of the faith. And once they were done, both parties were so grateful for one another's company, and the monks were so grateful for the teaching. But when the teachers set sail, and once they were a good, fair distance off from the shore, they looked back, and they could see an object in the distance. And it seems like it's making its way towards the ship, getting closer and closer. And sure enough, they could see that one of the monks was running on top of the surface of the water, just like Jesus walking on top of the Sea of Galilee. And finally he arrives, and the monk says, "Oh, teachers, we're so sorry. We forgot how the first part of that prayer went." And the teacher said, No. I think you guys are good. We're going to keep going. You guys keep at it, whatever you're doing. So again, guys, we need both. We need the practical as well as, call it the mystical, the parts that we just don't quite understand, and to hold that tension. And really these two elements form story. Okay, so my last example, we got to ask ourselves, now what of the cosmic level? And to that, I'd like to turn to the Gospel of John and look at what's called the two endings. And in these closing passages of the Gospel according to John, we start in what's sometimes called the second ending at the last chapter of 21. And it says, "And there are many other things that Jesus also did, which were they written down one by one, I think the cosmos itself would not contain the books that would be written." So think of actions and one by one, like a list of historical data about the facts of Jesus' events while he was on earth. Now this second ending serves as like a theological, or what's sometimes called dreamlike coda added on the latter. So let's flip back to the chapter previous in chapter 20 at the end, and I'm reading from Hart's translation of the New Testament. It reads, "Of course, Jesus performed many other signs as well before the disciples, which have not been recorded in this book. But these ones have been recorded so that you might have faith that Jesus is the Anointed, the Son of God, and that in having faith you might have life in his name." So he's emphasizing the signs, so it's conveying the mystery of Christ's miraculous works. His healing the sick, his raising of the dead to life. This passage also touches on the essence of his being, that he's the Anointed, the Christ, the Son of God. It's who he is, deep, deep down. Now he's also touching upon this virtue of faith, which is like an immeasurable quality, let's say. And ultimately, John writes what could be the book's a priori structure of meaning, that the reader might have faith and have life in Christ's name. These passages reveal the transcendent point of meaning that selects which historical events to include and which details of his essence to describe. This is where earth is informed by heaven and where heaven is made manifest in the earth. This is where story happens at the cosmic level. And this passage also reveals the familiar features to build upon and the mysterious wonders at the fringe that might remind us of unbounded potential, as well as where the limits of reason might be. After all, have we measured all there is to Christ? Have Christians, or those who are in Christ, realized their fullest potential of divinity, being one with the incorruptible God? In closing, the symbolism of story is comprised of the heavenly attributes of essence or quality with the earthly facts of historical events. So story allows for the familiar or the principal features of space to be guarded by the strange, mysterious fringes of time that confuse us. The symbolism of story allows Hart to tell the story of Christianity, all 2,000 years of it in 343 pages. For Bob's obituary to be 2 paragraphs, and for John to write the essence and mission of Christ in 21 chapters. And when done well, story leaves out many details, but yet nothing seems to be missing. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was helpful in understanding how story works symbolically. And maybe you too have a tension of, man, do I just stick with the facts or do I really capture the essence of what's happening? So let me know what you think about what we went over today in the comment section below. If you had any questions or anything to add to this discussion. I have just been really enjoying the discussion in the comment section and the videos so far, so keep it up, guys. To support this channel, tell a friend. If you like these videos, click the like button. If you want to receive notifications of future videos, click the subscribe button. To contribute financially, there's a PayPal link in the description below, as well as a few other links to wish lists for gear and for books and research materials. I was so excited to receive a few contributions because it allowed me to purchase On the Incarnation by Athanasius. And this one's a really cool copy because it particularly has the introduction by C.S. Lewis, written in 1944. I'll be getting into this in future videos. I also was really blessed to have received Explaining Traditions, Folk Behavior in Modern Culture by Simon J. Bronner in the mail. This was on my wish list, and it was, in fact, the most expensive book on the wish list. So I was so blessed to have received it. It's a bit bigger than I expected, so I'm excited to go through it and really draw out some of these modern traditions and really how tradition works in folk tales and in culture. So look forward to that. There's even a section on American football as American tradition. So I went over that in my video with the symbolism of the Super Bowl trophy ceremony. So who knows, maybe I'll do a reprise to that after reading this book. Thank you so much for the support, guys. Until next video.